thinking a bit about the theme for this year's Disability History Month of independent living, I was wondering why in the Middle Ages there appears to be less emphasis on independent living than we have nowadays. And perhaps if we just take one kind of symbol maybe of independent living as an example and play that through, maybe there's an answer. Now, I kind of think that in modern society, particularly kind of in the popular view, the wheelchair is sort of the instrument that symbolises disability. It's the signage that's used for disabled parking spaces and so on and so forth. So non-disabled people tend to view the wheelchair as disability as a whole, full stop. So again, just do a little thought experiment. Why are there no wheelchairs in the Middle Ages? I've looked into this. I've tried to find examples of wheelchairs as a mobility aid, as something that enables independent living, and I just have not found anything. The earliest wheelchair, anything like a modern chair, is probably late 16th century, and it's a big upholstered chair with small wheels on, and to all intents and purposes it was more about moving the piece of furniture and less about moving the person who sat in that piece of furniture. So why? Is it just that we've got the technology? I don't think so, because when you look at some of the most spectacular buildings that we still have around today, cathedrals, a society that could build Gothic cathedrals could quite easily have built wheelchairs. You have metal rims for wheels on carts, on coaches. You have pulley mechanisms, that's what they used to hoist up all the stone when they built the cathedrals. You could have chair surfaces, maybe woven out of wicker, so quite lightweight. There's nothing, I think, that would have prevented medieval technology in those later centuries, 1100 to about 1400, of building a wheelchair. So why not? I think one answer is the kind of infrastructure that we take for granted in the current Western world wasn't there. There's no smooth pathways. There are no paved, well, even if there are paved roads, they are cobblestones. And when I was talking to a modern wheelchair user, they told me that manoeuvring on cobblestones on a slope when it's rained is not particularly good. So basically, you need flat level surfaces, ideally, or as people know, ramps. That just isn't there. Hardly any of even the bigger towns had smooth paving. Interestingly, the only place where I've come across a wheelchair is in the Vatican in Rome, where one of the popes in 1285, apparently he had gout, he had very severe gout, and he couldn't walk anymore. And there's a description that he sat in a wheeled chair so that he could perform the service by moving around in the wheeled chair. And I think that is the earliest example of a wheelchair, but it's used inside a nice paved level surface. So a wheelchair just would have been completely impractical. So I think the kind of independent living aids that we take for granted now, we've got to put them in the context of the times. Yeah, it's not a case of one size fits all. Certain things just would have been not just unfeasible, but completely impractical back in the Middle Ages. And if you're then thinking, well, what about independent living? Very few people were actually completely independent in this modern sense in the Middle Ages. They were far more keen, we might even say, on community. In fact, people, and by this I mean non-disabled people who live on their own are pretty much the exception. Most people, whether disabled or non-disabled, lived in some kind of community. People lived in households. You hardly get a single person In fact, when you do get a single person, they tend to be female and elderly and are regarded at the time as poor. It's something that people feel sorry for. People live in family units, not the big families of southern Europe, but here in England, pretty much sort of nuclear family, maybe a grandparent if they're still alive. But certainly, if they're artisan class, if they're what we might call working class upward, there would have been servants who lived in the house as well. So that the whole notion of doing something independently is just not as pronounced as it is now. So if someone was disabled and needed help because they couldn't do something independently, it's actually not seen as that negative, because everybody has help and everybody's doing things with other people.